Hi, this is lesson 3 of cross-hatching, and in lesson 3 we are going to explore different methods with pen and how those pens are going to be affected by the surface that we draw on. I'd like to show you this little sketchbook. Did you notice the size? It's fairly small compared to my hands. This is the size of it. It's a Stillman and Byrne, and it's their Gamma series. The paper is off-white. It's not exactly white. And I don't know if you can see, I think you can. There's a little bit of a grain to it. There's a little bit of a tooth. I absolutely love this paper. One thing you need to know though, too much tooth, too much grain might become your enemy when it comes to cross-hatching, because you don't want anything to hold you back as you're constantly doing this motion. But I'm going to show you here briefly the things I do using, for instance, a Pigma pen. So this is one of them. This is when I practice noses. This is really more or less of a practice book. I also use a lot of blue Bic pen, so that's an example of that. My next favorite sketchbook is the Moleskine. This is a Moleskine sketchbook. If you open it, you get my name there at the top. I love this paper also because it is not white, it's off-white, and it really does not have tooth at all. If I could bring this over to the light a little bit, if you could see, it's very smooth. So when you tackle cross-hatching, your pen is going to be very happy to slide across this kind of surface. The problem that I have is that sometimes I draw on both pages and one of the pages rubs against the other one and makes marks, but what can I say? This is another example of the cross-hatching done on this very smooth type of paper. But it really works. I mean, can I take this off? Here we go. All right, this is a perfect example of how dark you can get with a pen against this kind of paper. See, there's barely any texture to this paper. It's a dream. It's like butter. What can I say? This is really ideal. So you know already that part of cross-hatching is practice, practice, practice. And when you practice, it's not always obviously coming out perfectly. It's a perfect example here of some other noses that I did in this Moleskine sketchbook. And I'm going to talk about the pens in a second. So you see it's got mistakes. You've got mistakes here and there, but it doesn't matter because it's all about learning. These are what we would call studies. Let's talk about the pen that I used for this. This is a fountain pen that I got from my dad. He gave me this fountain pen a couple of years ago. He bought it in 1987. So this thing is over 3 decades old. And the nib is made of pure gold, white gold and gold. Not that really it should matter, because I told you a minute ago that cheap material is where it's at. But the beauty of this is that you can make marks that never fail. Here I can tell that I don't have a whole lot of ink left because you can see through these little lines, so I need to refill. But this particular fountain pen can be held like this, meaning the nib is the other way and you can make those very, very thin lines, you see? And also you can make thick lines when you use it the regular way, which is that way. Okay, so that's an example of kind of a fancy tool, I'll be honest with you. This is called a Mont Blanc Meisterstück. For those of you who need to know, it's also known as the 149 fountain pen. It is outrageously expensive, so I would not recommend this as something you should have, but it happens to be something that has a huge sentimental value to me, and it happens to be an amazing machine. It works every time. That's what really, you can leave it on your desk for 2 weeks and pick it back up and it will work. It's amazing. Now, going less fancy, but definitely just as efficient, is the Pigma. The Pigma Micron, my favorite width is 05. I also go with 08. All the black pencil drawings that I just showed you in my 2 sketchbooks were done with this particular pen, or my other favorite, the Copic multi-liner. It's an '07, so it's a little wider than this, but not by much, frankly. And the beauty about this one is that it can be refilled. Something I didn't know until I showed up at the store, and I'm like, oh, this is a refill. Okay, great. So I just bought the refill, put it in the back, and then it's as good as new. They're not particularly cheap, but they're certainly not in the $100 range at all. So they're very affordable. I love these 2 pens. These are my go-to pens. These will resist any kind of watercolor that you add to them. They're archival inks. They last forever. You can draw something 10 years later, the ink will look exactly the same. I love Pilots. I love this brand, Pilot pens. And this is a V7. I prefer V7 to V5 because it grabs the paper less when you start drawing with it. Now the ink quality is not at all the same as, say, that of a Micron, but this is very cheap. You can have it everywhere. If you lose it, it's really not a huge loss. It's an excellent pen, in my opinion. Another excellent pen that I've sworn by for years is your good old Bic pen. You cannot go wrong with a Bic pen. I think originally they were made in France. This is made in Mexico. It doesn't really matter to me, but they are really amazing little tools. Cheap, and they never let you down. This, however, will drool. So I'll show you what we do when it starts drooling, okay? It really is, it's a bit of a challenge because, of course, the tip, well, we'll talk about this in a minute. So now my habit when I go into, let's say, my Moleskine sketchbook, I don't draw on the thickness of the book itself. I will put right underneath the paper that I draw on. Okay, let me see which one is going to be the next one. Okay, this is going to be my next page. That's a blank page. I am going to put my clipboard right underneath my page like this, so that I am as close as possible to a hard surface. That is really the best way to do it, in my opinion. The problem is that my clipboard is kind of big and I have a camera today, and I cannot really have this hit against the camera. So my best bet will be to go the way things are right now with my sketchbook open. It is not an ideal situation. As I told you, it might get a little soft, but we're just going to have to deal with it. Remember in the pencil cross-hatching lesson, we did a potato. It was exactly the same potato, and I am going to reuse this potato that I did not even wash, believe it or not. This is what is going to sit in front of me. I'm going to put it like this. It doesn't really matter. Don't overthink how you're going to put it in front of you. And I'd like to start with my Bic pen. It is the cheapest. Now, what you're going to notice as soon as you start drawing with a Bic pen like this is that it's going to want to drool. So what I do, and I'm going to show it to you here, it's a perfect example. I've got a drawing that I've done here recently. This is my grandma. And this is done all on directly with a Bic pen. This, however, is a Bristol piece of paper. It's fairly thick. But you see what I did in the corner here? I constantly clean my tip, or I just go like this to free up the ink a little bit. It's messy, but you cannot avoid doing this when you draw any kind of drawing in cross-hatching, because when you cross-hatch, your pen is going to want to drool. That's what it does. Let me give you another example of that. You see here I drew this particular person from Sketchy. Look, the top is all covered with those, you know, the cleanups. Same here with these eyes, okay? All right, so let's get started. Now, obviously, There's no erasing here. Not that I erased at all with the pencil anyway, but it's kind of freeing to know that whatever you start with a pen, well, that's what it is. You have to live with your choices. So, you know what? Why don't we... I don't know if I should put it... No, you know what? Let's keep it in this direction. As long as you guys can see very well what I'm drawing, okay? I think this is what we're going to see the most. So my potato is, again, a pretty irregular shape. And don't be afraid of making this shape. See, it's starting to drool here a little bit, but that's okay. That's what the big pen does. You can't prevent that. You can only just clean it up a little bit as you go. Oh, there's the shape of my potato. And I've got a little thing here, little thing over here. Da-da-da. All right, starting to look like one. I don't know, but I'm looking again at where the darker area is. That's really crucial to start cross-hatching. I notice that it gets very dark here, here, and of course I'm also going to have to deal with a shadow, but right now I don't want to touch it. So there's darkness here, there's darkness there, and there's definitely a lot of light coming from here because my light source is this way. So I'm gonna start, and I don't know if you've noticed, again, I'm gonna pull towards me, right? And I'm going to acknowledge the fact that my potato is curved. So most likely, I'm going to start with a curved motion a little bit, okay? Now, I'm starting very lightly here, very lightly. You don't want to start by putting a lot of pressure on that pen, because you really cannot take it away afterwards. Remember, I told you it's like putting salt in a dish. You can't take the salt away. Same thing with cross-hatching. Go light, go very light. You can always come back and add more. I have no particular rhyme or reason as to why I'm starting this way, why I'm spinning that way. It just feels like it fills the page quickly, so I'm doing that. And I'm really not putting a whole lot of pressure, okay? Look, this is even less. See how pale this is? The marks that I've just made now with my pen are very light, even compared to the very first ones. Practice doing that. Even on an empty piece of paper, you want to get good at making different marks with your big pen. Meaning, are you going to put pressure? Are you going to not put pressure? And here I am spinning my paper already. I have to. I really have to. Also, did you notice that all my marks are pretty close together? When you cross-hatch, you always want to keep things close together. It doesn't look as good if you space each stroke from one another. It just doesn't look good. So keep them tight, but not tight to the point that they would make one block. You can't do that either. It's not going to work. And that gesture, you know, this continuous gesture is really muscle memory. If you play a musical instrument, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Because it's like when you play guitar, your hands end up playing. Your brain is no longer in the game at that point. Okay, I'm going to try to bring this a little closer to my camera without making too much of a mess. And I'm sorry if this makes the camera move a little bit. It's pretty dynamic, you know. Okay. I'm starting to fill this potato. Again, don't think you can do cross-hatching in 5 minutes. It's really a meditative exercise. It's something that is kind of in the long haul. Give yourself the time, okay? You can't just do a little cross-hatching drawing like this if you only have 10 minutes in front of you. Give yourself the time to understand what you're doing and how much this corresponds to the thing you have in front of you, okay? Ooh, I'm going too far up. I'm going to bring it down. Here we go. Okay. This is where a lot of my darkness is on my potato right now. So I know I'm going to come back to this area. Look, it's messy. It's not looking good right now. It's really looking quite haphazard. So I'm going to go on like this because I'm not worried. I know that I come back and come back and come back. That's all I do. Trying to keep things steady. Okay, and never forgetting that I'm dealing with a curved object, okay? In this case, it's a potato. So my pen is not drooling too much. It drools less if you don't apply much pressure on it. It's funny how that goes. I'm flipping it all the way around, by the way. Did you notice? All the way around. Because, again, that gesture of cross-hatching is best when I pull towards me. So that's what I'm doing. Going very lightly here. Okay, there's darkness here that I should not ignore. There is some here too. And whenever it's dark, I really don't hesitate to bring in a lot of pressure on the pencil, you see? This is much darker already than anything dark I've done so far because these are really dark areas on my potato. There we go. Okay? It will make sense. It will all make sense. Okay. Now I have the feeling that I'm pretty safe going over. Okay, let's talk about speed. I'm not going too fast because I noticed that some of the most catastrophic things I've done in cross-hatching were done when I wanted to, or maybe not even consciously, when I wanted to speed things up a little bit with my hand, and I noticed that it didn't work. I'm slowing things down, but still keeping that rhythm, but not doing it crazy fast. Okay, again, spinning things around. Pulling towards me as I go. Okay, it's starting to look like a potato a little bit. Would you agree? Okay. Now, the biggest danger is to overdo it, okay? We don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do now is really pay attention to where the light is so that I don't go into it and mess things up. Keeping things very light and not rushing. Did you notice? I'm not rushing. I'm giving myself the time with those gestures. The most difficult thing when you crosshatch is knowing where to stop. When you are roughly satisfied with where your darkest darks are, and obviously for me it's not quite the case here, that's when you know where to start. I'm only touching up here. But basically this is it. This area here was very light extremely light. And in order to create more lightness as you draw in cross-hatching, your pen should not be facing this way, it should be more this way, so that the side here is used to make these very, very light lines. And they're a little longer and slower than the rest. I'm going to make a couple more here so you can actually, so you can see. Okay, here. Going very lightly. And here we go. The beauty about ballpoint is that you can really control how much pressure you put on your pen, giving this illusion of lightness here, and then when you press, suddenly you've got a darker area. Now that's not going to be possible using something like this, and that's the next thing I'm going to use to show you the same potato. Are you ready? Now, how do I turn something that is so seemingly chaotic into something that's going to make sense? Well, again, what comes into play is how much layering you're going to do on top of it. Okay? So I'm going to focus on this area and make it look a little better, okay? So here we go. I should have a piece of paper to cover this one up, but maybe I'll get to that. As I want to go a little darker in this area, I am now going to bring my pen more like this rather than like this, okay? And that is going to allow me to make very thick lines. You see them? Right away, it's like boom, something that you really cannot achieve with a blue big pen, a ballpoint. It never goes so dark. But this is the beauty of this, is that, okay, once you've decided where your darks are, you can come back and make them a lot bolder. There we go. See that? And it really has interesting results. I'm not quite there yet because I need to make dark lines here as well. Once you start doing more and more of these, you will understand why it's such a meditative exercise. Why this repetitive motion can be so soothing and can bring you so much peace, really, inner peace. So I'm alternating between using the broad strokes for the darker areas, which I'm not afraid to use here because it's so dark. And then as I approach the top here where the light is, I go much lighter. I have a Faber-Castell here, Pit. Great ink again, and this will allow me to do really thick strokes. See the tip? So chiseled. And let's say the shadow is about this way. Nope, not quite. It goes out that way. Okay. And now all I have to do is fill in my shadow. I've noticed a lot of times that this particular pen, Faber-Castell, the Pit, is not exactly the same kind of black as the black that I used here with the Copic. So it doesn't always match, but it's pretty good. Big pen and Copic, which is very much the same feel as a Micron. So for the drawing of the nose, I'm going to show you the possibilities of the fountain pen. And I may not go, well, we'll see. We'll see how far I go with this, but I want to show you what it looks like when you cross-hatch with a fountain pen. So I'm using, again, the same nose as I did in my tutorial for pencil. At this time I'm in pen, right? So here we go. This is where the darkness is. Going really slowly. This is where a lot of dark is. So now I am, did you notice I just turned around my fountain pen, which by the way I refilled with ink. So now I should have plenty to get me covered. Okay, but I'm gonna go back and flip it this way because this is really the best way. You're gonna see how I make these little cross hatchings. All right, keep in mind, I want to find where the darkest spot in my photo are, and that's what I'm following. That's what I'm working on first, okay? And when it's not that dark, just go really lightly. Oh, it's very dark here too. Okay, there. There as well. You hear the scratching on the paper, right? This is extremely thin. And what a different approach when you use a thin pen like this, because suddenly you can do things much more deliberately. You have room to choose. Oh, it's fascinating. Look at how tiny those marks are. And the brown ink for me is no coincidence, because that is really what gives me the impression that I'm drawing like Michelangelo. Ha ha ha. But I mean, really, when you draw with this kind of ink, it just suddenly becomes, I don't know, a little more artistic in my opinion. I really like ink in different colors. And I encourage you, if you ever buy any kind of fountain pen, to experiment with different colors of fountain pen. Slowly but surely, right? Slowly this little spot of light is appearing as I'm darkening and darkening what is on top of it. And that's kind of the magic of cross-hatching, if there is any, is how to convey light. You convey light by creating darkness all around it. And that's the case here. See, it's starting to appear as something that looks a little more like a nose. Something that's going to seem obvious to say is obviously the thinner the pen you choose, which is really the case here. I'm using the thinnest part of my nib. The thinner it is, the more time consuming it's going to be for you to finish something. But there is something very satisfying about doing something with such a small nib, is again because you have so much more control over a single little area like this. And again, that meditative aspect of drawing, I can't say it enough. This is really crucial. Those little thin little nibs will really allow you to slow down and take your time And you know, all the stuff that preoccupies you, cross-hatching will sort of make it, not make it go away, but really give you a lightness about it as you get lost in those little gestures. It is to me a huge antidote to any kind of anxiety, or maybe also a form of sadness, because it really, you're a little weightless when you crosshatch. There's no doubt about it. You become weightless. And I know that people who run, people who do physical exercise will relate to this. I think there is something to be said about getting into a groove and clearing the stress of your everyday life, which sometimes can be a little overwhelming, let's face it. Okay. I'm close to obviously not finishing, because if I tried to finish, I would go up a little further. But oops, see that is too clean almost here. I need to blur that edge here a little bit, as I did, I believe, when I was in pencil earlier. Okay. Let's bring this a little closer to the camera. It is a sheer mess when you look at it, but that mess has different values. Sometimes I left things alone over here and over here, and sometimes I went over several times. And that is what creates the volume of that nose. And this is all done with a fountain pen. Don't think that your fountain pen should be a Mont Blanc. You can do this with any fountain pen.